This movie is one of the worst comic book films I have ever seen. Period. It is soulless, joyless. They clearly had no idea what they were doing when adapting these characters. It makes some of the most baffling choices I have ever seen in a movie I went to see in the theater. My friend and I walked out of the movie drained, physically and emotionally. In fact, we had to go back later that day to see a different comic book movie, a much better one, just so we would not end the day on such a low note. This is such a disappointing adaptation. So now that I finished recapping how Fant 4 Stick made me feel 10 years ago, now I can tell you how this new Fantastic Four movie made me feel the exact opposite. That's right, if I could sum up my review of Fantastic Four 2025 in just a few words, it's really good. I really loved it, actually. And I'll be honest with you, I really wasn't expecting much going in. I certainly didn't think it was going to be bad or terrible or anything. I was fairly certain that it was going to be the best Fantastic Four movie we've ever gotten. But considering that all the previous live-action Fantastic Four movies were either unpolished, mediocre, or just plain terrible, saying that this is the best Fantastic Four movie by comparison really isn't saying much. And I have to remind myself of this all the time, but good by comparison is not the same as good. There have been times in the past where I've appreciated a movie too much, especially movies in a franchise, simply because it makes basic improvements on what came before. So saying that this is better than all the previous Fantastic Four movies, like, that's just the bare minimum, which is why I'm frankly really happy to say that this new Fantastic Four movie hits that bare minimum and then goes well above and beyond to make what I think is a truly great Fantastic Four movie. What it gets right first and foremost is the characters. I'll admit I was kind of skeptical of Pedro Pascal because he's just not the first person I would expect to be playing Mr. Fantastic, especially when he's got facial hair. But he embodies Mr. Fantastic and Reed Richards really well, and I also absolutely loved Sue Storm and her dynamic with Reed. I really liked this new version of Johnny and Ben Grimm, the Thing. I still think the 2005 version of the Thing is going to always be my favorite when it comes to live-action Fantastic Four movies, but these versions of the characters are really solid. At first, I kind of found the approach that it takes with how the characters act to be a little strange, because this is definitely the most comic book Fantastic Four movie, because unlike, say, Rise of the Silver Surfer in 2007, this actually has Galactus looking like Galactus instead of just being a giant cloud. So this one fully embraces feeling like a comic book, looking like a comic book, being in a comic book world. In fact, that's one of the reasons I'm really glad that this was not set in the main MCU timeline. It's set on its own separate Earth, which allows it to be this cool retro futuristic version of the 1960s. This allows the movie to not only harken back to the era where the Fantastic Four kicked off what we all know as Marvel today, but it also has that sense of hope and optimism that sci-fi and superhero stories from the 1960s were really known for. But getting back to why I found it slightly weird, I noticed that the personalities and the performances of the Fantastic Four are not quite as, shall we say, exaggerated and colorful as they were even back in the 2005 and 2007 movies. But strangely, that really works because the movie instead focuses on just fleshing them out like real, likable people and having them truly embrace the family dynamic, which is what the filmmaker said was extremely important here. So it gets us to like them on that level, and then their unique personalities can shine through naturally and organically instead of them having to be really over the top about it. And I think that ultimately proved to be really smart, because if you are going to have this 1960s retro futuristic aesthetic, if you're going to fully adapt elements from the comic, if you're going to do all of that and you still want people to be emotionally invested and take the premise seriously, then you need to ground the main characters a little bit so that it all still feels plausible. And I think this movie strikes that balance really well. Another part that surprised me but also ended up working surprisingly well based on how the movie was executed is that if you're going in expecting this to be a full-on superhero movie for them to just be fighting crime constantly and to using their unique powers all the time. You're not really gonna get that. Don't get me wrong, they still use their powers. There are scenes where they fight bad guys. It is there at the right times, but it's not the main focus of the movie. And I actually think that's its greatest strength because it showcases what makes the Fantastic Four specifically unique compared to other superhero teams, because they're not just superheroes, they're not just crime fighters, they're also scientists, they're explorers, they're adventurers. There actually is a good portion of this movie dedicated solely to that, which I was not expecting because I generally tend to avoid trailers as much as I can, but it makes this feel unique compared to the previous Fantastic Four movies and shows what makes these characters unique in the larger superhero landscape. I also find it interesting how a movie can technically on paper have the same problem as another movie, but because of how it executes it and adds something new on top of it works. For example, the 2005 Fantastic Four movie is usually criticized for not being exciting enough, not having the Four use their unique powers enough, and not actually fighting Doctor Doom until close to the end of the movie. And again, on paper, you could say they can't have that same problem here. They don't focus on showcasing their powers as much compared to some past entries, and the big fight doesn't really come until closer to the third act. But the reason it works in this movie is because they've put in the effort to make us really like and root for these characters, and because there's other interesting and exciting stuff, like there's the big stakes of whether they're going to be able to save the Earth, going on this adventure, making the story really personal. And I think that's when I knew that this was going to be truly great, that I was going to love this movie, because you can tell that the writers and the filmmakers put in that extra effort to making everything as personal as possible. I don't want to go too in-depth because I don't want to give spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it, but each character, at least most of the characters, again, it's not just the main big conflict. It's like, no, we can go a step further. Let's make this personal. Reed, Sue, and especially Johnny have their own little character arcs they go to, or something that makes it personal. Like, without getting into spoilers, it's even personal for Galactus. Obviously, Galactus is willing to destroy the Earth and consume it if he doesn't get what he wants, but there's also something specific that he wants, that he thinks that if he goes to Earth and gets something that the Fantastic Four have, that it will finally free him from his, billions of years of just having to constantly consume planets to survive. So even for the villain, he's trying to get something more than just destroying Earth. And like I said, that thing that the Fantastic Four have that Galactus wants, it makes the story really, really personal for them. It's like, oh shoot, maybe we could solve this right now, but are we really willing to give that up? Can we even possibly consider doing that? And it creates these challenges that bring out the characters at their best and their worst and makes them feel fully fleshed out. And getting back to what I said about the sense of hope and optimism, this movie captures it surprisingly well without it feeling too cheesy. There's a big scene where protesters who are mad at the Fantastic Four gather outside the Baxter building, and I know that if I were in Reed and Sue's position, I would have given some kind of lecture about, does humanity really deserve to be saved if we're willing to make this kind of sacrifice, or if it would go really dark and show that, oh, we've been protecting these people all this time and they don't deserve it. But no, Sue just gives a really hopeful speech that should not work. It should be too cheesy for us to take seriously, but because of the general sense of optimism and forward thinking that the rest of the movie embodies, it's really cool, and we actually see the whole world come together to help the Fantastic Four solve this problem. And I just wasn't expecting that, but I really loved it. Now, while the action spectacle and showing off the cool superpowers is not really the main focus of the movie, when it does happen, it is still really awesome. I haven't mentioned the Silver Surfer yet, which I really like this version of the Silver Surfer. Like, her scenes really carry weight to them. I don't know if they quite, it's weird. They kind of do flesh her out more than the 2007 Silver Surfer, but they also don't, because she doesn't like spend as much time one-on-one with them. But I still really like her, and this movie actually takes advantage of the fact that she is on a surfboard. There's a scene where I think she surfs on lava or through a wormhole, all these different creative ways to use that ability. And when we do finally get to the big action, the scale and the special effects are actually surprisingly good. That's another advantage this has over a lot of Marvel movies. It's kind of a cliche to point out at this point, but a lot of modern Marvel movies just don't look very good. The lighting's not great, and it kind of feels washed out and gray. And I won't say, like, there are other more colorful comic book movies or more immaculately shot movies than this, but I personally found the colors and the cinematography to be really satisfying, and I can feel that there's care put into the production design, how a shot is composed, what we're trying to say in this part. So it feels like there was really passion behind this movie. The filmmakers really did care. If I had to give any complaints, part of me, this is kind of similar to how I felt with Superman. I really like this movie and it has good pacing and moves along steadily, but when they're trying to accomplish so much and doing it well, you're naturally going to wonder, could this movie have been a little longer? Would it have been better if they had? Could they have fleshed out certain things a little more? And as I kind of implied earlier, Ben the Thing, he doesn't have as much to do as the others. I mean, well, literally speaking, yes, he is heavily involved in the plot. He is always doing something, but in terms of, say, a character flaw or an insecurity or some unique struggle to him, he doesn't really have that compared to all the others. And I think the reason for that is because instead of being an origin, this movie is set 4 years after they've become the Fantastic Four, so he's had time to get comfortable with himself and overcome those insecurities. But yeah, just when all the other three have their own little arcs and struggles unique to them that they're going through, and Ben, by comparison, doesn't have that, it does stick out a little bit, but I still really like him in the movie. And I can't really talk about this specifically without getting into spoilers, but there is part of me that feels that the way the third act was resolved was maybe a little underwhelming. Like, I was kind of waiting for something else to happen. Then again, there is a lot of emotional whiplash in the third act, constantly going back and forth, guessing what's going to happen, who's going to survive, how this is going to play out. So it kept me on the edge of my seat. But yeah, other than those minor gripes, just off the top of my head, I'm just trying to get my initial thoughts out here. I really can't think of any huge problems that I had with this. Overall, I think Fantastic Four First Steps is not only the best Fantastic Four movie we've gotten, it's just a great Fantastic Four movie, a wonderful comic book movie, just in its own right. It understands the characters, it makes things as personal for them as possible, it embraces what makes them unique compared to other heroes. I love that it's set in a retro futuristic version of the 1960s with the cool technology and production design that comes with it, but also the sense of adventure, exploration, optimism for a better world. I can't believe I'm saying this, like, obviously I was going to be excited for Avengers Doomsday to a certain extent simply because of what it is, but I can personally say that I'm genuinely excited to see it now purely because of how much I loved this movie, and it's completely set on its own earth, the most disconnected to the MCU so far, but yeah, I'm excited to see what comes next because I love this movie. I think we should all just really appreciate this moment because, at least for the time being, it feels like we're kind of having a bit of a rebirth when it comes to the comic book industry, both with Superman on the DC side and Fantastic Four on the Marvel side. Just two really solid movies that feel like a new beginning, either for the entire universe or just for a specific group of characters that capture what makes comics so special, particularly the Silver Age, and just makes us excited to see what comes next and enjoying these versions of the characters. This has been a really fun month to go to the theater to see comic book movies. But those are my initial thoughts on Fantastic Four's First Steps. Now I want to hear from you guys. Have you had a chance to see it yet? What did you think about it? Are you like me? Do you think that it's the best Fantastic Four movie we've gotten so far, or would you rank the movies a little differently? Are you excited to see what comes next? Whatever your thoughts are, feel free to share them down in the comments. Let me know what you think. And if this is your first time here, be sure to do all the standard stuff. Leave a like, hit subscribe, the bell so you get notified whenever I do a new upload. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.